I always thought that a wedding ring was like armor, something that kept the world at bay, a silent declaration that you were chosen, that you belonged to someone, and they belonged to you. For 20 years, I looked at the ring on my finger and felt safe. I thought it meant something. Now, as I sit here staring at that same ring on the table in front of me, it looks like nothing more than a piece of metal. A lie wrapped around my finger for 2 decades. My name is Orson. I'm 47 years old. Until last night, I had a wife named Marlene, and I believed in forever. It started the way any other evening did. I got home late from work, nothing unusual. I was in sales, and late nights came with the territory. Marlene had sent me a text earlier saying she'd be out with some friends, so I expected the house to be quiet. I made myself a sandwich, cracked open a beer, and flipped through the channels. A normal night. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. At first, I thought it was spam, but then I opened it. You should see this. Attached was a video. I hesitated. Something about it sent a chill down my spine. My gut told me not to press play, but my fingers moved before I could stop them. The screen filled with an image of a dimly lit hotel room. The angle was shaky, like someone had recorded it on their phone from behind a door. My mind was still trying to piece together what I was looking at when I heard her voice. Marlene. She was laughing flirty, light, the way she used to sound when we were dating. And then another voice, a man's voice. Deep. Familiar. The camera moved, and I saw them. Marlene was sitting on the edge of a hotel bed, dressed in a silk robe I had never seen before. Her legs were crossed, her eyes sparkling as she clinked a champagne glass with the man standing in front of her. That man was my best friend, Gerald. I stopped breathing. The video continued. Marlene leaned in, whispering something in his ear. He grinned and slipped a hand onto her thigh. She didn't pull away. She didn't even flinch. Then she kissed him. Not a hesitant, regretful kiss. Not a mistake. It was slow, deep, like she had done it 100 times before. And then the robe slid off her shoulder. I slammed my phone down so hard it nearly cracked. My heart was pounding in my ears, my body frozen. I wanted to scream. I wanted to punch something. But most of all, I wanted to wake up. Because this had to be a nightmare, right? Except it wasn't. I forced myself to pick up the phone again, my hands shaking. I scrolled back up to the unknown number and typed. Who is this? Almost immediately, a reply came. You don't know me, but I thought you deserved to know the truth. I stared at the words, my mind racing. Who would send this? And why? Was this some kind of twisted prank? Then another message came through. They've been meeting at this hotel every Thursday for the past 6 months. Room 214. If you don't believe me, go see for yourself. I stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. My hands clenched into fists. Every part of me was screaming to get in my car, drive to that hotel, and kick that door down. But a tiny voice in my head whispered, think, Orson. Think. I wasn't the kind of man who acted on impulse. I was careful, calculated. And if I was going to confront this, I needed to do it right. So I sat back down, exhaled slowly, and texted back. Who are you? No response. I stared at the screen, waiting. My entire life had just collapsed in on itself, and the person who dropped the bomb had vanished. I turned my gaze back to the wedding ring on the table. For 20 years, I thought it meant something. Tonight, I realized it meant nothing at all. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? My mind was a storm, my body wired with rage, pain, and something else, something that felt like dread. That video, that text, it changed everything. But there was one thing I still couldn't wrap my head around. Who sent it? Who was lurking in the shadows, watching my wife and best friend like some ghostly messenger, only to drop the evidence into my lap before disappearing? At 3 a.m., I was still sitting in the kitchen, phone in hand, staring at the message. I reread it for the 100th time. They've been meeting at this hotel every Thursday for the past 6 months. Room 214. If you don't believe me, go see for yourself. The words burned into my brain. Marlene had been lying to my face for 6 months. No hesitation. No guilt. And Gerald? The man who had been my best friend since college, the one who was at my wedding, the one who held my firstborn in his arms? He had been smiling in my face while sleeping with my wife. A part of me wanted to burst through our bedroom door, shake her awake, demand answers. But another part, the part that was colder, sharper, knew better. I wasn't going to storm in like some betrayed husband in a soap opera. No, I needed to be smart. I needed the truth, all of it. By morning, I had a plan. Marlene came downstairs around 7 a.m., still in her robe, yawning as she tied the sash around her waist. She stopped mid-step when she saw me sitting at the table, a full cup of coffee in front of me, untouched. "You're up early," she said, her voice casual, like nothing had changed. I stared at her. I watched the way she moved, the way she blinked sleepily, the way she didn't even hesitate before kissing me on the cheek like she had every other morning for 20 years. A liar. A damn good one. "Didn't sleep well," I murmured, keeping my voice even. "Thinking about work." She gave me a sympathetic look. "You need to take a break. Maybe a weekend getaway? Just the two of us." A weekend getaway. With a woman who had been sneaking off to a hotel every Thursday to be with my best friend. I forced a smile. "Yeah, maybe." She smiled back, completely oblivious. Then she poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down across from me like nothing was wrong. Like she wasn't stabbing me in the back every single week. I clenched my fists under the table. This was the woman I gave my life to. I needed proof. Not just a video from a faceless stranger. Not just a text. I needed to see it with my own eyes. So I played along. I kissed her goodbye when she left for work. I texted her in the afternoon like usual. I even told her I'd be working late again. And then, when the clock hit 7 p.m., I got in my car and drove to the one place I never thought I'd have to go. The hotel. It wasn't some five-star resort. It wasn't even discreet. It was a cheap business hotel off the highway, the kind that smelled like industrial cleaning supplies and stale cigarettes. I parked across the street, my heart pounding, my stomach in knots. Then I waited. At exactly 7:42 p.m., a car pulled up to the entrance. Marlene stepped out. She looked different. Not in some dramatic, movie-style transformation, but different enough that I noticed. Her hair was curled, her makeup was heavier, and she was wearing a dress I had never seen before. A short one. One that wasn't for me. She walked inside without hesitation. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. 2 minutes later, another car pulled up. Gerald. Seeing him made my blood run hot. I had imagined it, replayed the video in my head over and over, but seeing it in real life? Seeing him casually step out of his car, run a hand through his hair, and walk inside like he owned the place? It took everything in me not to charge in there and put my fist through his smug face. Instead, I forced myself to breathe. I had come here for a reason. I needed to see this for myself. I got out of my car and walked toward the hotel. The lobby was nearly empty, just a bored receptionist scrolling on her phone. She barely glanced at me as I stepped into the elevator and hit the button for the second floor. Room 214. I moved quietly, each step feeling heavier than the last. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. My mouth was dry. And then, finally, I was there. Standing outside the door where my wife and best friend had been meeting for 6 months. A part of me wanted to knock. No, not knock, kick the door in, drag them both out, demand answers. But I wasn't that kind of man. I needed to be smarter. So instead, I pulled out my phone. I pressed record. And then, slowly, I lowered myself down, pressed my ear to the door, and listened. At first, it was quiet. Just the sound of muffled voices, laughter, soft movements. And then I heard something that made my stomach twist into knots. My name. I pressed closer, barely breathing. "He has no idea," Marlene was saying. "Not a clue. You should have seen him this morning, sitting at the table like a lost puppy. He trusts me so much." Gerald laughed. He always was a little naive. A pause. Then Marlene's voice, softer. "But it's getting harder. I feel like he's starting to suspect." "Then we speed things up," Gerald said. "He won't see it coming." I pulled back, my mind spinning. Speed things up? What the hell did that mean? I didn't know. But I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just an affair. It was something worse. Much, much worse. And I wasn't going to sit back and let it happen. I stood outside that hotel room, my breath shallow, my fist clenched. Marlene's words replayed in my head on an endless loop. He has no idea. Not a clue. The way she had laughed. The way Gerald had agreed, calling me naive. And then, we speed things up. Speed what up? That was the part that stuck with me the most. This wasn't just an affair. There was something more to it. A plan. A scheme. Something they were keeping from me beyond just the betrayal. I backed away from the door, forcing myself to breathe. If I stayed here a second longer, I was going to break it down. My head was spinning, my stomach in knots. I needed to get out of there before I did something reckless. I left the hotel quickly, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the lobby. The air outside was cold, but it barely registered. My mind was moving a mile a minute. I drove aimlessly for a while, gripping the steering wheel so tight my fingers hurt. My first instinct was to confront her, to go home, sit her down, and demand to know what the hell was going on. But then I thought about that laugh, that arrogance, the way she spoke about me like I was a fool. No, I wasn't going to play into her hands. I needed to be smart. I needed to get ahead of them. So I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I hired a private investigator. His name was Saul Wickman. He was a retired cop in his late 50s, the kind of guy who looked like he had seen it all and cared about none of it. I found his number online and met him the next morning in a rundown diner on the outskirts of town. He didn't ask many questions, just listened, nodding along as I told him everything about the video, the messages, the hotel, the conversation I had overheard. He barely reacted, except for one moment, when I mentioned that they were planning something. That made him pause. Most affairs are just affairs, he said, stirring his coffee lazily. People are selfish. They cheat, they lie, they cover it up. But when they start planning something, that's different. What do you think it means? I asked. Saul shrugged. Could be a lot of things. But whatever it is, it's not good for you. That sent a chill down my spine. He slid a small notebook across the table. Give me every detail. Dates, places, names. I'll start digging. The next few days were excruciating. I acted normal. I went to work, came home, kissed my wife on the cheek. She was affectionate, as if nothing had changed. She still texted me throughout the day, still laughed at my dumb jokes. If I hadn't known better, I never would have suspected a thing. But I did know better. And that made every moment unbearable. Then, on Thursday night, Saul called me. Meet me in my office, he said. Now, Saul's office was a small, cluttered space above a pawn shop. It smelled like old paper and cheap coffee. He had a desk covered in files and a single chair across from it, which I sank into the moment I arrived. He didn't waste time. I found something, he said, tossing a folder onto the desk. And you're not going to like it. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside were photographs. Marlene and Gerald, together, at restaurants, in his car, walking into the hotel. Some of them were recent. Some were older. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the bank statements. Saul tapped one of them. This account, joint, under both their names. Opened 6 months ago, right around the time you got that video. My stomach dropped. She's moving money, Saul continued. A lot of it. Draining it from your accounts, transferring it here. My hands tightened around the paper. They're not just having an affair, I said slowly. They're preparing for something. Saul nodded. And if I had to guess? They're planning to leave. Together. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The signs were all there. The secret meetings, the bank transfers, the talk of speeding things up. They weren't just sleeping together. They were planning something behind my back. Stealing from me. Lying to my face. Using me. I clenched my jaw. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I had spent the last few days trying to keep my emotions in check, trying to stay rational. But now? Now, I was done playing the fool. That night, I went home and sat in the dark, waiting. Marlene came in around 10, humming softly as she kicked off her heels. She froze when she saw me sitting there. Oh, she said, startled. Didn't realize you were home. I just stared at her. She shifted uncomfortably. What's wrong? I smiled. For the first time in days, I felt completely calm. Nothing, I said. I just wanted to spend some time with my wife. She smiled, but I saw it, hesitation. The tiniest flicker of something in her eyes. Doubt. Fear. I wasn't supposed to suspect a thing. And that was exactly why she was about to learn the truth. Because I wasn't just her husband anymore. I was the man who was about to take back everything. The next few days were the hardest test of my life. I had to pretend that nothing was wrong, that I was the same clueless husband Marlene and Gerald believed me to be. Every morning, I kissed her on the forehead like always. Every night, I smiled and asked about her day. And through it all, I kept my voice even, my face calm. But inside, I was watching, calculating, waiting. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I had the proof, but I needed to see how deep this went. How much they had planned. How much they had stolen from me. So I kept my mouth shut and played my part. And the more I watched, the more I realized just how much I had overlooked. Marlene wasn't just distant, she was planning. One evening, I found her sitting on the couch, scrolling through listings for houses. Expensive ones. Not in our town. Thinking about moving? I asked casually. She startled, then laughed. Oh, just looking. But I saw the way she tensed. The way she immediately switched tabs. The next day, I checked our home computer's search history. Flight tickets, vacation rentals, legal loopholes for divorce settlements. She was preparing to disappear, and she wasn't planning to leave empty-handed. I stayed quiet. I let the days pass. And then, on Wednesday night, I found what I was looking for. Marlene was in the shower. Her phone was charging on the nightstand. I took it. I didn't check messages. That would be too obvious. Instead, I checked her calendar. There it was. Friday, 8:30 p.m. Hotel Grandmont. Not the usual cheap hotel. This was different. Something big was happening. I put her phone back before she could notice. Then, I made a call. To Saul. I need you at the Grandmont on Friday. I want to know everything. Friday night. I arrived first. I wasn't about to let her see me, so I kept my distance, sitting at the bar near the entrance. From where I was, I had a clear view of the hotel lobby. Saul was already in place, blending into the crowd. At exactly 8:30, Marlene walked in. She wasn't alone. A man stepped in beside her. Not Gerald. Someone else. Tall, suited, older. He placed a hand on the small of her back as they walked toward the elevator. She smiled up at him like she had known him for years. My heart pounded. Who the hell was this? Saul sent me a message. Follow. I'll cover the exits. I stood, keeping my distance as they stepped into the elevator. The doors closed before I could catch the floor number. I clenched my fists. Saul called. She's on 14. Room 1432. I took the stairs. I needed the time to clear my head. The rage inside me was simmering, but I couldn't let it explode. Not yet. By the time I reached the 14th floor, I was calm again. Focused. I moved down the hallway, stopping just outside room 1432. I put my ear to the door. Laughter. A clink of glasses. Then, the man's voice. So, when will you be able to move the rest of the money? A pause. Then Marlene's voice, smooth and assured. As soon as he signs the papers. He still doesn't suspect a thing. My grip on the doorknob tightened. You're sure? The man asked. If he gets even a hint of this, it could get complicated. She laughed. Please. Orson is completely in love with me. He's an idiot. By next week, the money will be ours, and he'll be out of our lives forever. Something inside me snapped. I stepped back and kicked the door open. The man shot up, spilling his drink. Marlene's face turned white. For the first time in weeks, I let her see the truth. I wasn't clueless. I wasn't naive. And she had no idea what was coming next. The room fell into a stunned silence as the door slammed against the wall. The man, whoever he was, recoiled, his face a mask of shock and panic. Marlene sat frozen on the couch, her wine glass still raised halfway to her lips. The expression she wore wasn't one of guilt or regret. It was something far worse. Annoyance. Like I had just interrupted an important business deal. I took a slow step inside, letting the weight of my presence settle in the air. Well, I said, my voice eerily calm, I hate to be the idiot who ruins the party, but it looks like I just crashed my own funeral. Marlene's eyes darted toward the man. He was older, well-dressed, and his watch alone probably cost more than my car. But there was something else, something that made my stomach turn. He wasn't just some random guy. He was comfortable, too comfortable. And that's when I saw it. The stack of legal documents on the coffee table. I stepped closer, my pulse hammering. The heading at the top of the first page nearly made me choke. Power of attorney. I picked it up, scanning the details. My name was all over it. My assets. My accounts. And at the very bottom, a space for my signature, neatly marked with an X, like I was some fool they could trick into signing away my entire life. I looked up at Marlene, my grip on the paper tightening. This was your plan? I asked, my voice quiet but deadly. You were going to steal everything? Not just the money, my name, my future? You wanted me to be left with nothing. She exhaled sharply, finally setting her glass down. Orson, let's not be dramatic. Dramatic? I let out a bitter laugh. You were about to rob me blind, Marlene. And what? Run off with? I gestured toward the man. Who the hell is this, by the way? A new boyfriend? Your financial planner. The man cleared his throat and straightened his tie. I'm Marlene's attorney, he said, voice measured. And I would advise you to leave before you make a scene you'll regret. That was it. That was the moment I knew she wasn't just cheating, wasn't just planning to leave me. She had already left. In her mind, I was nothing more than a hurdle to clear, a loose end to tie up before she disappeared into a new life with my money and this expensive, soulless lawyer at her side. And that was when I did something that neither of them saw coming. I smiled. You know what, Marlene? I said, dropping the document back onto the table. You almost got me. Almost. I turned toward the door. But you made one mistake. She crossed her arms. Oh? And what's that? I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, I hit play. Her own voice filled the room. As soon as he signs the papers, he still doesn't suspect a thing. Please. Orson is completely in love with me. He's an idiot. By next week, the money will be ours, and he'll be out of our lives forever. The color drained from Marlene's face. The lawyer swore under his breath. I turned the volume up just a little, letting every damning word sink in. You were right about one thing, I said, sliding the phone back into my pocket. I was in love with you. And yeah, maybe I was an idiot for trusting you. But I'm not your idiot anymore. She stood abruptly, knocking over the wine glass. You were recording me? I shrugged. What can I say? Guess I've been getting smarter. The lawyer was already moving, gathering the papers into his briefcase. This is entrapment. That recording won't hold up in court. I let out a low chuckle. Oh, buddy, I don't need it for court. I stepped closer, leaning just enough to make sure they saw the fire in my eyes. I just needed to ruin both of you. Marlene's hands clenched into fists. You wouldn't dare. I tilted my head. Wouldn't I? Imagine how your friends will react. Your family. Hell, even Gerald. Because, spoiler alert, he doesn't know about this guy, does he? Her expression twisted into something venomous. She was cornered, and she knew it. The lawyer grabbed his coat. This is getting out of hand. Marlene, I'll be in touch. Then he turned to me, forcing a smirk. Good luck, Mr. Spencer. Something tells me you're going to need it. I didn't respond. I just watched him scurry away, knowing full well that his reputation was already stained. A respectable lawyer caught conspiring in an extortion attempt? That would spread fast. The moment the door shut behind him, I turned back to my wife. Ex-wife. She was breathing hard, her hands shaking. But I didn't feel pity. Not anymore. 20 years, Marlene, I said, voice quieter now. 20 years, and this is how it ends? A cheap scam? A fake document? Not even the decency of a clean break. She swallowed hard, her bravado finally cracking. You don't understand it. I understand perfectly. I exhaled, shaking my head. And you know what? I'm done. Her lips parted slightly. Done. I nodded. Yeah. Done playing your game. Done being the fool. Done loving someone who never loved me back. For the first time that night, she looked scared. Not of me, but of what came next. I walked past her, straight to the door. Then I turned back one last time. Oh, and Marlene? She blinked, her eyes desperate. You should check your bank accounts. Her face paled. I smiled again, this time wider. Let's just say, I wasn't the only one making withdrawals. Then I walked out, leaving her alone in a hotel room that, for once, felt just as cold as she was. I stepped out of that hotel room feeling lighter than I had in months. The cold air hit me as I walked to my car, but I barely noticed. My mind was still running at full speed, fueled by adrenaline and the sheer satisfaction of watching Marlene's world start to crumble. She thought she had played me, thought I was too blind, too naive to see what was happening right under my nose. But she never expected me to fight back. And now? Now, she was left with nothing but a stack of worthless papers and a future that wasn't going to be nearly as comfortable as she had planned. I had to admit, though, she had nearly pulled it off. The affair, the money transfers, the fake power of attorney. It was an intricate betrayal, one that must have taken months of careful planning. She probably thought I'd just sign whatever she put in front of me, too blinded by love to question it. And when the money was safely in her new account, she'd disappear, leaving me with an empty home and an even emptier bank account. But she underestimated me. And now, I had the upper hand. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. My thoughts weren't just on Marlene, they were on what came next. Because as satisfying as it was to expose her, I wasn't done. Not yet. The next morning, I was up early. Too early. Sleep hadn't come easily, but I didn't care. I had work to do. Marlene hadn't come home. I wasn't surprised. She was probably scrambling, trying to figure out how much damage I had done, checking her accounts only to realize the transfers she had made were reversed. Yeah, I hadn't just discovered her secret stash. I had emptied it. I wasn't stupid. I knew the law. The money she had stolen from me was still technically in my name until she made her final moves. And with a few well-timed calls, I had ensured that every cent she had tried to siphon away was safely back where it belonged. By the time she realized it, she'd be in full panic mode. Good. She deserved to know what it felt like to lose everything in one night. I sipped my coffee, watching the clock. 7:15 a.m. If I was right, she'd be calling soon. At 7:16, my phone rang. I let it ring twice before answering. "Morning, dear," I said casually. "Sleep well?" Her voice came through tight, strained. "You son of a—" "Careful," I interrupted. "Wouldn't want to say something you'll regret. Not when you need my help." "You stole my money." She spat. How did you even— "Your money." I let out a low laugh. "That's rich. You mean the money you were stealing from me? You mean the money you thought I'd just hand over because you batted your pretty little eyes and lied your way through another day?" Silence. I leaned back in my chair, letting her stew in it. "What's the matter, Marlene? You didn't think I was capable of fighting back? Thought I'd just roll over and let you walk away with everything? You don't understand it." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said. "You and your lawyer friend were going to clean me out, disappear, and leave me with nothing. You almost pulled it off, too. Almost." Her breathing was uneven. "I can fix this, Orson. We can talk. Please." "I just— talk?" I repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You want to talk now?" Funny, because when I tried talking to you about our marriage, about the nights you were working late, or the way you'd pull away from me, you weren't so eager then, were you? She was quiet. I let out a long breath. "Here's the deal, Marlene. I don't care what you do next. You can pack your things and leave. You can cry to Gerald or that sleazy lawyer of yours. You can even try to come up with some new scheme to take what's mine." I paused, letting my next words sink in. "But you won't win. Not this time. You tried to play me, and you lost." She made a small noise, something between a frustrated huff and a broken sob. "So that's it?" she asked, voice shaking. "You're just walking away?" I smirked. "Oh, sweetheart. I walked away the moment I saw that video. You just didn't realize it yet." And with that, I hung up. I should have felt empty. I should have felt some kind of loss, some deep, aching sadness for the woman I had loved for 20 years. But all I felt was relief. For the first time in a long time, I was free. I had survived the worst betrayal of my life, and instead of letting it destroy me, I had taken control. I had outplayed the people who thought they could break me. And as I sat there, drinking my coffee, watching the sun rise over the city, I realized something else. I was finally ready to start over. The silence in the house was different now. It wasn't peaceful or comforting. It was hollow, like the echo of something that had already died but hadn't been buried yet. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of the past 20 years pressing down on me. Marlene hadn't come home. Not that I expected her to. Her last desperate phone call had told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't remorseful. She was just angry that she lost. I should have felt victorious. I had outmaneuvered her, ruined her plan, and taken back everything she had tried to steal from me. But there was no celebration, no sense of triumph, just emptiness. I looked around at the living room, the same room where we had once sat together on lazy Sundays, where we had decorated Christmas trees, where we had fought over the stupidest things and then made up like we always did. Except we hadn't made up in a long time, had we? Somewhere along the way, our marriage had turned into a performance, a carefully choreographed dance where I played the fool and she played the devoted wife. And I had believed it. The reality of that hit me harder than anything else. She hadn't just betrayed me in the past few months. No, this had been going on longer than that. How long? A year? 2? 5? I had no idea. And that was the worst part. I had been living a lie for years, and I never saw it. I forced myself to stand. Sitting in this house, surrounded by memories that now felt like poison, wasn't going to help me. I needed air. I grabbed my keys and drove. I didn't know where I was going at first. I just drove aimlessly, watching the city blur past me. Then, without thinking, I found myself heading toward an old diner we used to go to when we were younger. Back before everything got complicated. Back when we were just two kids in love, dreaming about the future. I pulled into the parking lot but didn't go inside. Instead, I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, remembering. I could still picture us in there, laughing, making plans, imagining a life together. And for a moment, I wondered, was any of it real? Or had she always been like this, and I just never saw it? I didn't want to believe that. I wanted to believe that, once upon a time, Marlene had loved me. That at some point, she had meant the vow she had spoken. That we had been real. But I would never know for sure. The past was a closed book, and I was done trying to read between the lines. I exhaled slowly and turned my phone back on. I had switched it off after hanging up on her, not wanting to deal with the fallout just yet. But now, I was ready. The moment the screen lit up, notifications flooded in. Missed calls, voicemails, and one text message that made my blood turn cold. "You don't get to just walk away from this, Orson. You'll regret it." I stared at the message, my grip tightening. It wasn't desperation. It wasn't even anger. It was something else. A threat. The next morning, I woke up to a pounding on my front door. Not a normal knock. Furious. Loud. I sat up instantly, heart racing. My first thought was Marlene. She had finally lost whatever grip she had on herself and decided to show up in person. But when I checked the peephole, it wasn't her. It was Gerald. I hesitated for a second, debating whether I should even open the door. But then I saw the look on his face. Rage. Panic. Fear. And that's when I knew something had gone horribly wrong. I unlocked the door and opened it slowly. Gerald stormed inside before I could say a word, shoving past me. "What the hell did you do?" he snapped, turning to face me. I narrowed my eyes. "Excuse me. You think this is funny?" he hissed. "You think you can just mess with people's lives and get away with it?" I crossed my arms. "You're gonna have to be more specific, Gerald. I've been messed with 4 months now. Try catching me up." His face turned red. "She's gone." I blinked. "What?" "Marlene," he shouted. "She's gone. I can't reach her. I don't know where she is, and I know you had something to do with it." A slow, cold realization crept over me. She was gone? That wasn't part of the plan. She was supposed to be furious, humiliated, trying to figure out how to fix the mess she had made. She wasn't supposed to just disappear. I frowned. "Gerald, I haven't talked to her since last night." His eyes flickered with uncertainty, but he shook his head. "You're lying. You did something, Orson." "I know you did." I sighed and ran a hand down my face. "Look, if she's not answering your calls, maybe she's finally realizing you're just as much of a mistake as I was." That set him off. He lunged at me, grabbing my shirt, his face inches from mine. "I swear to God, if I find out you..." I shoved him back, hard. "Get your hands off me, Gerald. You don't get to come into my house and act like you're the victim here." He stumbled, barely catching himself. His eyes were wild, desperate. "This isn't over," he growled. "You're gonna regret all of this." And then, just like that, he stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I stood there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. Marlene was gone. Gerald was panicking. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I didn't know what was coming next. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. Something bigger was happening, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for it. For the first time in weeks, I felt something new, uncertainty. Marlene was gone. Gerald was panicked. And now, after everything I had done to expose them, I found myself staring at the front door, wondering what the hell had just happened. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. No more guessing. No more waiting. I needed answers. I grabbed my phone and dialed Saul's number. It rang twice before he picked up. "Got something for me?" I asked, skipping the pleasantries. Saul sighed. "You could say that. Your wife, ex-wife, whatever, she wasn't just planning to run. She already did. Booked a one-way flight last night. Paid in cash. No return ticket." I froze. "Where?" "Somewhere overseas. Small island. I'm still tracking it down." I exhaled sharply. So that was her plan all along. She knew she had lost, knew I had blocked every financial move she made. So instead of sticking around and facing the wreckage, she ran. No explanation. No goodbye. She just disappeared. "She's scared," Saul added. "She knows the authorities are looking at her for fraud. The money transfers, the fake documents, it's all catching up to her." I let his words settle. Marlene, the woman who had spent 20 years weaving her perfect web of lies, had finally tangled herself in one too many. And I wasn't the one who had to make her pay for it. Life was doing that for me. "You're quiet," Saul noted. "Not what you were expecting?" I leaned against the counter, shaking my head. I don't know what I expected. I thought she'd fight, try to twist it back in her favor. I didn't think she'd just run. "People like her," Saul said. "They don't care about loyalty. They care about winning. The moment they lose, they cut and run. Trust me, it's better this way." I believed him. I should have felt something, anger, betrayal, maybe even a twisted sense of loss. But instead, all I felt was relief. She was gone. The weight that had been crushing me for weeks, hell, maybe years, was finally gone, too. 1 year later. It's funny how much your life can change in a year. When I think back to that night, the night I found out my entire marriage had been built on lies, I barely recognized the man I was. I was angry, broken, lost. I thought I'd never recover, never move on. But I did. I sold the house. Too many memories. Too many ghosts. I quit my job. Too much stress. Too many late nights that kept me from seeing the truth sooner. And for the first time since I could remember, I started living for myself. I traveled. I reconnected with old friends. I spent nights staring at the ocean instead of staring at my phone, waiting for a text from someone who never really loved me. I stopped surviving. And I started living. As for Marlene, last I heard, she was still running. From what? I don't know. The law, her own guilt, the mess she made. But I realized something important. She wasn't my problem anymore. She had stolen years of my life. But she wasn't going to steal my future. And Gerald? Well, let's just say karma took care of him, too. Turns out, the guy who cheats with another man's wife isn't exactly husband material. Last I heard, he had been dumped and left with nothing. Guess he didn't like the taste of his own medicine. I sat on my balcony, watching the sun set over the ocean, a cold drink in my hand, and realized something I never thought I'd feel again. Peace. The past didn't own me anymore. The betrayal, the lies, the pain, it was all behind me. I had won. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was finally free.